Wow, that was an episode. They mentioned Tulsa in the passing in the past, and I had assumed that it was just a casual mention, but like the reference to Emmett Till, which came to have fruit last episode, this reference wasn't just a casual reference. The show integrated the Tulsa massacre in a powerful way. And when I saw that they were going back into the past in the teaser for this week's episode, I wasn't necessarily that excited about it. I felt like going back was going to keep the story from having forward momentum. And they did a lot of the things I expected them to do this episode. I expected them to have scenes where they showed Montrose's abuse as a young man at his father's hands and how that cycle of abuse continued into the future with Atticus. But I didn't expect the execution of it to be so exceptional. And for me, this was just a staggering episode. Every week, I think that they have done the best episode of the show yet, and then the next week they do an even better episode. So I'm really stoked for the finale. I think that if it's as good as these episodes and even better, then they really could have something special there. And this was in some ways a tough episode to watch, and there were times where I questioned whether or not they should have integrated the Tulsa massacre in the way that they did. I feel that it's always dicey when you put characters from our era or from a different era back into a historical event and say, well, this is what they would have done if they'd been in this situation, because it can seem, and I'm not saying that this was, but it can seem disrespectful to the people who went through it, because this episode made it very clear that the people were fighting for their lives during this massacre, and they were doing everything that they could to survive, and it was just a hopeless, hopeless situation. And honestly, this was some Green Mile level emotion that it brought to me as I watched these people fighting for their lives and just being helpless as they were slaughtered. And obviously, a big part of what brought the emotion was the performances from the lead actors. I feel like particular shout out, I would say, goes to Jurnee Smollett for her performance during the scene where Atticus's great grandmother is dying and realizing that she's going to die. And that scene was just powerfully acted from both of these actresses, and the realization that her family has a future, but that she is going to die, the way that the actress playing Atticus's great-grandmother acted that scene was really, really well done. And even though this character was only going to be in this episode, I think that she had a very, very significant role, and she really, really left an impact. Her death was extremely saddening. The MVP of this episode, for my money, has to be Michael K. Williams. And I kind of felt like he might not bring it to this show. I felt like he might sleepwalk through it, but he's really brought it every episode that he's been given a chance to make an impression. He has. And this episode, the transformation of his relationship with Tick, when he is tormented, when he realizes that he may need to tell Tick that he could not be his real father, and when he finally reveals this to Tick after obviously wanting to never tell him this, and Tick's reaction basically disavowing their relationship, saying, the only reason that the only reason that I have a relationship with you is because I think you're my father, and now I don't even think you're my father, therefore I'm done with you. And, it's not clear at this point whether Montrose is Atticus's father or if George was his father. It's still unclear. But, to be rejected like that, to have this realization that your son wants nothing to do with you, but then over the course of this episode to see the transformation of Tick's feelings as he realizes what his father experienced at the hands of his own father. And then that gut-wrenching moment when Tick has to stop Montrose from saving this young man that Montrose has forced himself to forget, who was killed, and that he can't go and save him because it could keep Tick and his future family from existing. This was just a gut-wrenching moment. And I wish that they had introduced the idea that someone had saved Montrose and those other people with a baseball bat earlier in the episode. This is one of the few things I think could have been a little better from a writing perspective, because I think that introducing it a few minutes before it happens makes it slightly less interesting. But man, what a moment when Tick goes full Jackie Robinson on the racist and becomes his father's own hero, saving his life. That's a really powerful moment. Now, I do question the fact that the only reason he wasn't able to save the young man that Montrose was with was because they didn't feel that he could go out without risking the future. But it seems like they've taken the time travel approach, which is really the only way to not risk pretty obvious paradoxes, although time travel is always dicey with this, and that is that if you change the past, it's as if that was already changed. So the person who came to save the day was Tick. Now, if he had come earlier, realizing that his coming to save the day wasn't going to change anything, then he could have saved that young man as well, and it really doesn't seem like it would have changed anything, because it seems as if this is the type of going back in time where the past is set, which means that Uncle George will probably stay dead. I've seen some people theorize that they could go back in time and, save his life so that he doesn't end up dying, but it seems as though this is the type of time travel story where whatever you do in the past, when you come back to the present, nothing has changed. It was already that way in the past. More of a 12 Monkeys type situation. And I think, honestly, that's the only even moderately realistic way to do time travel, because otherwise you end up with all sorts of odd paradoxes, Lego Movie 2 style, if you know what I mean. But I felt like that was a great moment. Of course, it was interesting. I feel that so many of these characters at this point have special powers. It's almost like a superhero story in some ways. You have Hippolyta, who obviously has these abilities that she's come back after 200 years with, and has the ability to make, them able to go into the past by powering this machine. And eventually it seems like it was hurting her, and it eventually turned her hair purple so she looks like the character in her daughter's comic book. Hopefully she's all right. We're not sure what was going on exactly yet when she was getting zapped by the machine. But you've also got, obviously, Letty, who apparently her invulnerability also means that she's fireproof. And not just her clothes, thank goodness. She didn't go the full Daenerys. She was able to survive the burning down in the building and go walking down the street without her clothes burning off. And as I said, she gave a really good performance this episode, but she was also just very sprightly and attractive in the period costumes. All of the actors were, in fact. I thought Jonathan Majors cast a very dashing figure in his outfits this episode. And generally, the costumes in this show have been great, but they were more noticeable this episode because they took it back to this period setting. And I just thought this was a really strong episode. So those are my thoughts. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this one, please subscribe.